member for Petrie. The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the member for Monash.
Deputy Speaker, thank you for the call. I appreciate that you have noticed me in the room. Deputy Speaker, I like to look back on the Abbott, then Turnbull and then Morrison governments in one very fine light where a light shone brightly. And that light that shone brightly was investment in manufacturing right across, not just across our cities, but across our regions. We actually went into the regions, and my region of Gippsland, because I cover mostly West Gippsland and Darren's got East Gippsland, but the whole area of Gippsland was able to really focus very specifically on what we were good at. And this is really important, what we were good at. We are good at timber manufacturing, we're good at technology, we're good at issues around hydrogen, which I'll come to in a minute. And especially under the Turnbull government and our manufacturing program, we were able to help people invest in companies to the point, but there were criteria all around those grants that they received. And that's why I think the grants program is better than what has been put to me on the government's program this time. The grants program was, yes, you apply for it, here's the criteria. If you can perform to all these things, including the number of increased jobs you will bring to the region, which we're desperate for because, Deputy Speaker, you'd know very well, all the way back to the changes that went from the Kirner and Kennett government, our regions and the changes to the coal industry has really affected our job opportunities for our young people, our engineers, and changed the SEC all those years ago, where we created engineers that were so good that they're now working all around the world out of Latrobe Valley. All around the world. You will find people who were trained as apprentices in Latrobe Valley, in the mining industry, and all the other associated industries that went with it. And you know, that must be a real badge of honour for a lot of people, knowing how well they trained those people, that the world wants their expertise. That's where I think that the government's bill misses the mark. I'd have rather the government delayed for a while, just waited a while, not too long, but did a more investigation into where is the nation going to be in 30 years? And where do we need, what manufacturing as the nation of Australia, this great Southland? Where should we be investing so we're investing in niche markets that are going to provide jobs for our children and their children and their children? And where can we do that expertly? So we have strategic industries. At the moment, sadly, because my state government, the Andrews government, is determined to wipe out native forest harvesting that was supplying our paper industry and our furniture industry and creating about, well, I think there's between 800,000 jobs relying on that. And now our paper manufacturers in Australia are shedding jobs at Traralgon on a daily basis because they haven't got the timber supply. And what you have to know is we only harvest 0.5% of the available timber. 0.5% of the available timber. It's a renewable industry. And governments over a long period of time have invested in paper manufacturing in Traralgon. Why? In Morwell and Traralgon. Why? Because we want to be proudly say we manufacture our own paper. This paper here comes from Traralgon. And it's good hands and good people, good men and women who have made that paper. And we can be proud as a nation to say we make our own paper. We don't import it from a country overseas that has none of the environmental controls that we have. Not one. None of them do. But we put so many restrictions on our manufacturers, and then we come along as a government and say, but we're a new government, this is a Labor government, and we're going to have new plans. We're going to do it our way. And we're going to have a new independent board, and they're going to direct how this whole thing's going to go. But half of that board have to be union representatives. I don't mind if they're trained in the field. I don't mind if they've got a history of manufacturing. I don't mind if the new government wants to direct who's on what board and how and when, and take this program that my experience of manufacturing in Gippsland has been positively enhanced by the previous government's programs. Now, I'm not a great fan of everything governments do, don't get me wrong. I'm really not. I don't think governments are as efficient as they should be. But if they place funds targeted into specific businesses that can grow in your region and export or manufacture or produce or create in the full knowledge that they have to do what they say they were going to do. And I think a lot of the innovation, everything that's happened across my region of Gippsland and that of Darren Chester's the member for Gippsland, and I'm the member for Monash, across our region, these things have worked really, really well. And I have great hopes that in manufacturing that the government won't be able to muck this up, that they will actually work out where our future lies, because you need to know where your future lies and not be harking back to the past to say, well, this was Australia, it lived on the sheep's back. Well, we don't live on the sheep's back anymore, but we have some of the finest wool products in the world that we get manufactured overseas and then brought back to us, and we buy them. We're buying our own wool back. I mean, this suit that I'm wearing is Australian wool, but it wasn't woven here. It was probably woven in some factory with terrible conditions, probably in the Middle East or Vietnam, and then it goes to the UK, and someone correct me if I'm wrong here, goes to the UK, and then they put a print on it that says made in the UK. And where was it actually manufactured? I would suggest somewhere else. So there's a whole lot of issues that fall around manufacturing as a whole, and this nation, well, I suppose the rest of Australia would call me a Melburnian, because Melbourne's grown so big I'm just on the outskirts of Melbourne. So I'm a Melburnian. Melbourne was one of the greatest manufacturing hubs in the world, and it is now no longer one of the greatest manufacturing hubs in the world because of the restrictions we've put on ourselves, not to free up business, give them the opportunity, not tell them what they should be doing. If the government makes the mistake of telling them what they should be doing, rather than investing where business tells us they need to invest for future prosperity, well, that will be a fail. And I don't want government to fail in manufacturing and in grants to manufacturing, or in this particular case, it's your new National Reconstruction Fund Corporation. I've got a bit of a problem with the word reconstruction. Whilst this nation's faced some pretty tough times over the last 12 months, don't tell me it's a National Reconstruction Fund. We haven't just been through a war. We haven't had our cities decimated. We haven't got, only through flooding, we've had massive damage to infrastructure, but outside of that our cities are going pretty well. I'm not saying that'll be the same case, but don't call it a National Reconstruction Fund. Why would you call it a reconstruction fund? What are you reconstructing? Are you reconstructing the program, or are you reconstructing manufacturing in Australia? It's very unclear. And one of the things in this, Deputy Speaker, is I have the highest regard for the minister in this portfolio. He's Minister Husek. Highest regard, always have since he arrived in this place. I know he's dedicated and I know he's determined. I know he wants this to work. But I wonder what outside pressure is being put on him, because This gives the actual minister of the day an enormous amount of power as to where that money is spent. Now, is that going to be politicised like I've seen so many other government programs be politicised? Because that would wreck manufacturing in this country. If you want to win a few seats in Adelaide, you put all this money into Adelaide. You want to win a few seats in Brisbane, you put it into those seats in Brisbane you need to win. Is that what this is all about? Where we can direct all the money to our seats. It's like we give state governments money for housing, then they go and spend it in marginal seats for the long-term destruction of the Liberal National parties if they're a Labor government. It is. It's sort of underlying corruption. Now, I'm not accusing Ed Husick of this because I'm saying he has an enormous amount of power under this legislation to direct what happens. Now, if you've got a John Button, Senator John Button of the past, and that Senator John Button put together a car plan that kept manufacturing going in Australia for all those years, and the world has regard for what John Button put together and directed what happened in the vehicle manufacturing industry in this country. He probably saved it from immediate decline through the late 60s and early 70s. There's a minister that acted only in the interests of the Australian people. And how wonderful it would be if I believed that every action taken by a political party was only in the interests of the Australian people, that it was fair and it was just and it was reasonable and it was equitable, that it lifted people up. In every action it took, it lifted the community up. It gave opportunities to our newcomers, to people who have come to this country as refugees, who should be given the greatest opportunity because you find they're the hardest workers and they want to go out there and they want to do things. The Japanese came to us a few years ago and they said, look, we'd like to put a hydrogen production pilot plant in Gippsland. And they've done it. And today, big spread in the paper, the Japanese government are now putting $2.3 billion, $35 billion into the hydrogen plant in Latrobe Valley that will create jobs, opportunities and everything else for people in Latrobe Valley. Best news ever. But the Japanese are doing that. State government $50 million to get the pilot plant going. Turnbull government $500 million. I was there for the announcement. So they have proved the plant, they've proved the operation, they've proved that it works. It's hydrogen from brown coal. We've got enough brown coal to make enough hydrogen to keep the world going in a clean way for the next 10,000 years. I've never believed we shouldn't be using it to create electricity, building more efficient power plants. Why wouldn't we be? Why do we have to kick ourselves in the foot in this nation every time we go to do something? Every time they make a decision now, it seems we're kicking ourselves in the foot, and the rest of the world is laughing at us. That's why our manufacturing is so important, to have the best innovation, the best technology, the best people, the best opportunities, to have these start-up companies being encouraged and not putting barriers in their way all the way through. And you've got to make it easy for government to be able to deliver on behalf of those people that are going to do the best for our country. This should be seen as an opportunity. I understand governments want to come in and they want to put a new label on, I'm a new minister, and we're going to do it a different way. Well, I hope and pray it works, because if it doesn't, we kick ourselves in the foot again. And I want this to work. I want it to happen. I want this nation to succeed, because every time we succeed as a nation, we enhance the opportunities for our children and their families. And that's got to be important to everybody in this House. If we're not putting the Australian people first, whether it comes to manufacturing or any other job. If we're not putting them first, we're doing the wrong thing. So let's have regard to equality, fairness and opportunity.
I thank the member for Monash.